2:58 a.m. Strait of Hormuz. The narrowest point measures just 21 miles across. On one side, the rocky coastline of Iran rises dark against a sky thick with stars. On the other, the Omani peninsula of Musandam pushes northward into the Gulf like a blade. Between them, through a navigable channel barely 2 miles wide in each direction, moves roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply every single day. Supertankers, the length of 4 football fields, ease through these waters in a steady, slow procession that has continued through wars, revolutions, sanctions, and repeated military confrontations for decades. Tonight, that procession is about to stop. Deep beneath the surface, running silent at 140 feet, the USS Michigan has been holding its position for 11 hours. A guided missile submarine converted from its original ballistic missile configuration into something arguably more tactically flexible. A vessel carrying 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles in her converted launch tubes and the ability to insert and recover special operations forces through her lockout chambers. Her crew of 155 has been at heightened readiness since the previous evening, when the orders came through that changed their mission from surveillance and presence to something else entirely. Across the strait, invisible on the surface in the darkness, 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are holding positions they reached 6 hours ago after a transit from the carrier strike group operating further south in the Gulf of Oman. Their crews are at general quarters. Their weapons systems are fully online. Their commanding officers have read the same orders and reached the same understanding of what is being asked of them tonight. Overhead, at 41,000 feet, 2 EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft are flying slow racetrack patterns, their powerful jamming systems capable of blinding Iranian radar across a 50-mile radius. Their crews monitoring every electromagnetic emission from the Iranian coastline, with equipment sensitive enough to detect a radar system powering up from cold. The order has not yet come, but everything is positioned. Everything is ready. The question being asked in operations centers from Bahrain to Washington is no longer whether the United States Navy could seal the Strait of Hormuz. That question was answered years ago. The question now is how quickly, how completely, and at what cost. The answer to that question begins with geography. The Strait of Hormuz is not simply a body of water. It is a choke point in the most precise military sense of that word, a geographic constraint that forces maritime traffic into predictable, narrow corridors that can be controlled by whoever holds the dominant military position on either side. For Iran, the strait has always been the ultimate leverage point. Tehran has threatened to close it during virtually every major confrontation with the United States over the past 3 decades. The threat has always been treated seriously because the economic consequences of a closed strait, oil prices spiking globally, supply chains fracturing, economies from Japan to Germany lurching into crisis, are severe enough to make even the most hawkish policymakers pause. What Iran has consistently relied on is the assumption that the cost of reopening the strait after an Iranian closure attempt would be high enough to deter America from acting. Mines in the shipping lanes, missile batteries covering the choke point from the Iranian coastline, fast attack boat swarms capable of harassing and potentially sinking commercial vessels attempting to transit, anti-ship missiles deployed on the Musandam Peninsula's opposing shoreline through proxy forces. Iran's closure strategy was never about winning a naval battle against the United States Navy in the conventional sense. It was about making the strait too dangerous, too costly, too painful to use, and forcing a negotiated resolution on terms favorable to Tehran. The problem with that strategy, as Iranian planners have understood at some level for years, is that it assumes the United States' response would be limited, gradual, and constrained by the same economic and political pressures that make the strait's importance so significant in the first place. It assumes that Washington would respond to Iranian closure with measured counterpressure rather than the kind of overwhelming, rapid military action that could strip Iran of the ability to threaten the strait entirely. That assumption has never been tested at full scale. Tonight, it is about to be. The decision to seal the strait had not been made impulsively. It was the culmination of a 72-hour crisis that had begun when Iranian forces, acting on orders from the IRGC's Naval Command, had laid a minefield across the primary northbound shipping lane in the eastern approach to the strait. 3 supertankers had been damaged. One had sunk with a partial cargo that was now creating an environmental catastrophe visible from satellite imagery. The global oil market had convulsed within hours of the news reaching trading floors in London and New York. 3 countries had formally requested American military intervention to reopen the waterway. 2 American allies in the region had privately communicated that their governments could not survive the domestic political consequences of an extended closure. Washington had delivered an ultimatum. Iran had 48 hours to begin removing the mines and to stand down all military forces in the strait area. The 48 hours had passed. Not a single mine had been removed. Instead, additional Iranian naval vessels had moved into the strait area, and 2 more fast attack boat squadrons had been positioned at forward bases on the Iranian coastline. The ultimatum's expiration had been noted. The execute order was coming. At 3:31 a.m. it arrived. The first phase of sealing the strait was not visible to anyone watching the water's surface. It happened underwater, in the darkness below the shipping lanes, where the USS Michigan and a second nuclear attack submarine operating further east began executing the mine countermeasures mission that represented the most complex and dangerous element of the entire operation. American naval mine countermeasures capability has evolved significantly from the slow, painstaking process of earlier decades. The submarines carried AN/B LQ-11 remote mine hunting systems and were coordinating with MH-53E. Sea Dragon helicopters operating from a nearby amphibious assault ship, aircraft specifically designed and equipped for the mine countermeasures mission, capable of deploying sonar systems and influence-sweeping equipment that could detect and neutralize mines across wide areas of water. The minefield Iran had laid was not primitive. It included both moored contact mines and more sophisticated bottom influence mines designed to detect the acoustic and magnetic signatures of passing vessels. Clearing it completely would take days. Identifying its extent and neutralizing enough of it to create a safe transit corridor could be accomplished far faster. Within 40 minutes of the execute order, the mine countermeasures operation had identified the eastern boundary of the Iranian minefield and established a preliminary safe corridor along the Omani side of the strait, the southern shipping lane that Iranian forces had not yet reached with their mining operation. The corridor was narrow. It was not without risk, but it was usable, and making it usable was the first objective of the night. Simultaneously, the second phase began. The EA-18G Growlers overhead activated their full jamming capability, and within seconds the electromagnetic environment across the entire strait area changed dramatically. Iranian radar systems that had been tracking the American naval movements suddenly found their displays filling with noise, false contacts, interference patterns, the specific electronic blindness that comes when a sufficiently powerful jamming system is directed at your sensors. Iranian radar operators who had been following the situation with obvious alarm suddenly found themselves unable to reliably track anything. In the 12 seconds before Iranian commanders understood fully what was happening and began switching to backup systems and alternative frequencies, the 2 Arleigh Burke destroyers made their moves. Moving at flank speed toward pre-planned positions on either side of the cleared corridor, they were placing themselves as the visible, armed guardians of the safe transit lane, close enough to engage any Iranian surface vessel that attempted to interfere with traffic through the corridor, far enough from the Iranian coastline to reduce their exposure to shore-based anti-ship missiles. The third phase was already underway before the destroyers reached their positions. 51 Tomahawk missiles launched from the USS Michigan and 4 surface vessels of the American formation, their targets the Iranian mine-laying vessels and fast attack boats that had moved into the strait area over the preceding 24 hours. The Iranian vessels had been tracked continuously and their positions were known to within meters. The Tomahawks flew low and fast across the water's surface, their GPS guidance systems indifferent to the jamming that was blinding Iranian radar. 7 Iranian mine-laying vessels were struck in the space of 11 minutes. 4 fast attack boats that had been positioned at the forward staging area on the Iranian coastline were destroyed before their crews could get them underway. An Iranian Coast Guard vessel that moved toward the strait at speed following the first explosions was intercepted by warning fire from one of the destroyers and stopped dead in the water, her crew communicating their intent to stand down through distress frequencies. Iranian shore-based anti-ship missile batteries, the Noor and Qadr systems that represented the most serious threat to American surface vessels in the confined waters of the strait, were the fourth phase. 8 missile battery positions along the Iranian coastline had been identified and tracked by intelligence assets over the preceding weeks. As the Tomahawk strikes against naval vessels concluded, AGM-158 JASSM cruise missiles, launched from B-1B Lancer bombers holding at standoff range to the south, began arriving at the battery positions. Not all 8 were destroyed in the first wave. 5 were. The remaining 3 were degraded, their radar systems destroyed, even where the launch vehicles themselves survived, by AGM-88 HARM missiles fired by F/A-18 Hornets that had entered the strait area at low altitude under cover of the Growler jamming. Within 53 minutes of the execute order, the Iranian military capability to threaten traffic through the Strait of Hormuz had been reduced by an assessment that American planners would later characterize conservatively as 70%. The mine corridor had been cleared sufficiently for single-file transit. The surface threat had been eliminated. The shore-based missile threat had been severely degraded. The electronic environment remained dominated by American jamming assets. The strait was not sealed. It was reopened, and it had taken less than an hour. 3 minutes after the last airstrike concluded, the first commercial vessel, a Kuwaiti-flagged LNG tanker that had been holding position 40 miles south of the strait entrance for 19 hours, received clearance to transit. Her captain, a Norwegian national who had been in regular communication with the American Naval Coordination Center throughout the night, acknowledged the clearance with a single professional transmission and brought his ship to transit speed. The USS Michigan surfaced briefly to visual range, a deliberate signal to any Iranian observation post that might be watching, and then slipped back beneath the surface to resume her escort position below the tanker's keel. The strait was open. The question now was whether it would stay open. Keeping the Strait of Hormuz open after forcing it open is a fundamentally different military problem from the opening itself. The first phase, the strike operation, the mine clearance, the destruction of immediate threat systems, could be executed with the concentrated application of American naval and air power in a defined time window against fixed and known targets. The second phase was something more sustained, more complex, and in many ways more demanding of the resources and patience that define long-term military operations. Iran had not been destroyed as a military force by the strait operation. It had been degraded in the specific capabilities most immediately threatening to strait transit. The IRGC's broader military infrastructure, its ballistic missile arsenal, its air defense networks, its ability to reconstitute damaged capabilities over time, remained substantially intact. Iranian commanders who survived the night strikes were already beginning the process of assessment and response planning before the smoke from the burning vessels in the strait had cleared. The American Naval Force commander understood this with complete clarity. The operation had bought time and restored access. It had not resolved the underlying confrontation. Sustaining the strait opening would require persistent military presence in and around the chokepoint that Iran could not ignore, could not easily defeat, and could not outlast without paying costs that its economy, already under severe sanctions pressure, could not indefinitely absorb. The deployment that followed the strike operation was organized around 3 concentric rings of capability. The innermost ring was the strait itself, The two destroyers maintaining their Corridor Guardian positions were joined within 6 hours by two additional surface combatants and a Coast Guard law enforcement detachment team embarked aboard a high-endurance cutter for maritime interdiction operations. Any Iranian vessel attempting to approach the shipping lane without authorization would encounter a visible, armed American presence at distances that made hostile intent impossible to disguise. The middle ring was the air environment above and around the strait. Combat air patrols from the carrier strike group operating in the Gulf of Oman maintained continuous coverage over the strait and the Iranian coastline approaches. Two E-2D, advanced Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft, provided persistent radar coverage that extended over the Iranian interior, seeing everything that moved in the air across a radius of hundreds of miles, providing the carrier's strike aircraft and the surface combatants below with a common tactical picture that left Iran with no ability to mass forces for a counterattack without being detected and engaged before those forces reached the strait. The outer ring was the suppression of Iranian reconstitution capability. Intelligence assets that had been monitoring the three surviving Iranian shore-based anti-ship missile batteries reported within 4 hours of the initial strikes that Iranian crews were attempting to relocate the surviving launch vehicles, moving them away from their known positions to alternate firing points that had not been included in the American target packages. The response was immediate. Two additional JASSM strikes, tasked within 2 hours of the intelligence reporting, destroyed 2 of the 3 relocating batteries before they reached their alternate positions. The third successfully relocated and went dark, its position unknown, to its threat potential now requiring continuous surveillance that diverted intelligence resources from other collection priorities. This was the texture of sustained strait operations, not a single decisive engagement, but a continuous competition of move and countermove, strike and reconstitution, detection and concealment. Iran was not simply accepting the loss of its strait capabilities. It was adapting, improvising, looking for gaps in American coverage that could be exploited. Iranian fast attack boat crews that had survived the initial strikes dispersed their vessels into civilian harbors and fishing anchorages along the coastline, mixing with non-military traffic in ways that complicated American targeting decisions and forced operational pauses while intelligence assessments were updated. On the 41st hour after the operation began, Iranian forces attempted their first direct counteraction. 6 fast attack boats that had been sheltering in a fishing harbor north of Bandar Abbas sortied together at a high speed toward the shipping corridor, their crews apparently calculating that the speed of their movement would reduce the response time available to American forces. The calculation was wrong. The E-2D overhead had been tracking the boats since they left the harbor, and an F/A-18 strike package had been launched from the carrier 20 minutes before the boats reached the corridor boundary. All 6 boats were destroyed or disabled before they posed a direct threat to the transit lane. 47 hours after the initial execute order, the third supertanker since the operation began completed its northbound transit through the Strait of Hormuz without incident. Oil markets, which had spiked dramatically at the beginning of the crisis, began to stabilize. The physical flow of energy that underpinned the global economy was moving again through the world's most critical chokepoint. The cost of the operation had not been zero. 2 American sailors had been wounded when an Iranian anti-ship missile, fired from a position that had not been included in the initial target packages, struck a glancing blow against one of the Corridor Guardian destroyers in the operation's 14th hour. The destroyer had remained on station and combat capable. The missile battery that fired it had been destroyed within 19 minutes of the launch. But the wound was real, and it was a reminder that the operation's success did not mean the absence of danger. It meant that danger had been managed within acceptable limits, which is a different thing and a less comfortable thing than danger having been eliminated. The deeper lesson of the Hormuz operation was not lost on military analysts who studied it in the months that followed. The United States Navy had demonstrated something significant, not merely that it possessed the capability to force and hold open the world's most contested maritime chokepoint, but that it could do so rapidly, precisely, and with a level of operational coordination across multiple domains that no other military force on Earth could match. The integration of submarine operations, surface strike, electronic warfare, airborne surveillance, mine countermeasures, and precision strike into a coherent 53-minute opening operation represented the accumulated investment of decades of training, doctrine development, and technological refinement. But the analysts also noted what the operation had not done. It had not resolved the political confrontation that had made the operation necessary. It had not eliminated Iran's underlying motivation to challenge American naval dominance in the Gulf. It had not addressed the economic and political grievances that Iranian leadership pointed to as justification for its aggressive posture. Military operations can reopen straits. They cannot, by themselves, close the grievances that caused straits to be threatened in the first place. The supertankers kept moving through the Strait of Hormuz. The American warships kept watch. The Iranian military kept adapting, rebuilding, waiting. And the 21 miles of water that connected the Persian Gulf to the wider ocean remained what they had always been, the most consequential stretch of water on the planet, contested by forces that had fought over it for generations and showed no signs of stopping. The strait was open, for now, and in the Persian Gulf, for now, was the only guarantee anyone had ever been able to offer.